Back. Thank you for joining True Story Live. Tonight, The Cage is Open, Fly, a story of deconstruction. And our guest tonight is Brandee. And we're going to open that up to a conversation with her in just a moment. First, for those listening the first time, my name is Jason, and I am one of the hosts of this broadcast. And of course, I have my amazing wife with me. Her name is Jen. Jen, take a minute to say hello to the people.
Howdy. Howdy. It's good to be here. I won't be talking as much. I'll mainly be in the chat, but
Right.
still here for support. And if there's any
Yeah.
questions or anything like that.
Well, thank you for being here. And before I introduce Brandee, for anyone that has listened to the show before, as we talked about on some of our later broadcasts, this is the change that we were discussing. It's actually not a change for me because, as I've talked about many times throughout the years, that this was what I always wanted to do, which was to have people that were willing to share their true stories live with us. That's the title of the show, and it became a lot of different things over time, and I love what we did with it. We covered a lot of ground, and I think we just got to the point where some of it seemed redundant. We kept touching on some of the same topics, and there's nothing wrong with that. But with the changes Jen and I have been going through, we've talked a little bit about that on the different broadcasts, and those of you who have been around for a long time and heard us at the beginning 6 or 7 years ago, you will have noticed that. And I know a lot of people left. Um, they didn't unsubscribe, but they didn't come around anymore, and that's okay. People come and people go, and that's fine. What we're hoping to do is provide a safe place for people to tell their true stories live. And I am super excited about this. And fortunately, we have Brandee with us as our first guest on this new format. And I want to welcome her to the channel. Brandee, just say a quick hello to everyone, if you would.
Hello. I'm glad to be here.
Well,
This is
thank you.
definitely out of my comfort zone, out of my
Sure.
wheelhouse, but
Yeah.
I'm excited to share.
Well, thank you for being here, and I'm excited to dive right in. So before we really get rolling, I just want to say, and I'll say this again at the end, if anyone would like to share your true story with us, and this story is about deconstruction, but they're not all going to be about that. Like we're not saying this is the only kind of story we want to hear. I've from the beginning wanted to hear any kind of story. It can be your testimony of how you became a Christian. It could be um, Hindu or Muslim or whatever. I mean, the door is open to anything. That's my icon hasn't changed. It's still open, and I've described that before as I'm trying to be a person who's open to other people and what they believe and their thoughts on various subjects. And I've come a long way in that, and I'm going to continue to learn how to be more receptive and understanding of other people, and more loving. That's the biggest thing that's really changed for me, and I know it's going to continue to get stronger and stronger. My love for other people and acceptance of other people, and I think it's super important. All right, so let's get the ball rolling. I'll say hello to Nez Lover in the chat, and also our own Glenn. So far, both the people in the chat who've shown up are people that are a part of True Story Live. So welcome to the two of you. Thank you for being here. All right, Brandee. So I would like to start, if you don't mind, just telling us a little bit about where you grew up and a little bit about your childhood and anything that you'd want to share about that.
Okay. Well, I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania, excuse me, right by the upstate New York border. So we're right at the top of Pennsylvania. I am the oldest of 5 children.
Oh,
In a big Italian family. My mom is one of 5 as well. So, yeah, just a crazy, loud, Italian. Just
sure.
everyone's loud. Let me just put it that way. Everyone's loud.
Wow.
Everyone talks with their hands.
Oh, yeah.
So, so to go along with like let me back up a little. Okay, so I have 6 children. They range in age from 27 to almost 9. We have a birthday coming up in 2 weeks for my youngest.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm very busy. We homeschool the 5 youngest. So they are currently 16, 15, 13, 10, and like I said, almost 9. So that keeps me very busy. um, we're involved in sports. Definitely a soccer family. So
Oh, great.
lots of running. I put 10,000 miles on my car in the past 5 months. So if
Oh,
that gives
wow.
you any
That's
idea.
yeah,
Yeah.
that does.
So, but that's my life, kind of soccer mom, chauffeur, and you know, keep everybody well, take care of everybody. As far
Sure.
as I've been married for 20 years
Okay.
to just the most wonderful man that I cherish beyond words.
Oh,
I'm very, very thankful that we have grown together over those 20 years. Excuse me.
oh, you're
That
fine.
we, my husband, his name is Keith, and he went to church. They always say, from before he was born. I don't think ever
Oh,
missed a Sunday. Was in church every single Sunday. He went to a
sure.
Christian school. He went to a Christian college. He ran an abstinence ministry through college where they spoke in public schools around the Harrisburg area.
Yeah.
And he knew as soon as he graduated from college, we got married. We knew each other for 5 months from our first lunch date to actually saying I do. And so we're very thankful and very fortunate to have grown together over the past 20 years, considering we barely knew each other when we got together. So um, I couldn't love him more, and
Oh,
we have a wonderful life together.
I think
Um,
one of the things you mentioned, Brandy, is that you're growing together, and that is huge.
yeah,
Jen and I talk about that a lot and how important that is, because we hear stories from a lot of people who one of the members of the partnership or marriage, whatever
hmm
word you want to use for it, uh, changes a lot, and then it makes it difficult. The other person doesn't agree with the changes that he or she is making, and it can cause a lot of problems. So to have someone that you can grow with, even without any, deconstruction or anything like
right,
that, just in general, having someone that doesn't expect you to be the same person on the day they married you, expect
right,
that you are going
yeah,
to change and grow.
yeah. Over the past several years, I mean, I've been witness to I don't know, 5 or 6 divorces just in my
Yeah.
immediate circle of of people, um, all Christian marriages
Yeah.
that where one person was growing and the other was not, or going in the opposite direction, or yeah, just definitely not headed in the same direction.
Right.
And that's really challenging. And
Yeah.
I
It is.
can't even imagine going through this without my husband being on the same page.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that. Brandy, you mentioned that your husband was going to church before he was born, right? So
Yeah.
what about you? What was your introduction to church? Did your family all go, or were you taken to Sunday school by another family? Or let's talk about that a little bit. How did you get involved with
So my mother's family, they were not churchgoers. I don't ever remember anything being talked about at home.
right?
Um, but I had an aunt who was developmentally delayed who lived with my grandparents,
Okay.
and she never missed church, never.
Oh,
And she was involved in absolutely everything at the church. So it was like they went to see her when she was in the Christmas cantata and things
oh,
like that, right? And
sure.
we never missed an ice cream social at the church.
Oh, I love me some ice cream social.
Exactly. So we were things like that, but it wasn't. I don't remember anybody, including my mother, like talking about God or Jesus when I was really little. Um, I was baptized as an infant, at that same church. And really the only reason I know that is because I've seen the pictures, but
Oh,
it
okay.
wasn't like really anything significant.
Right.
And then I think I was like a preteen, somewhere in there. I had a friend who my best friend lived just 2 or 3 doors down from us, and they went to a Lutheran church, and they had a really cool youth group, a really active, cool youth group. So
Oh, good.
I started going to youth group with them,
Hmm.
and then because that my whole friend circle was there, and they were all beginning confirmation classes.
Yeah.
So I ended up becoming a confirmed Lutheran member of the church. I would say I was 13,
Okay.
14.
Sure.
Um, and I remember I thought it was so cool because like I got the box of envelopes with my name on it for my
Yeah.
tithe,
Yeah.
like
Oh,
that
wow.
once a
Start them
year,
early.
yeah, you get your own envelope, and that meant
Sure.
I was legit, right?
Full-fledged member.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I remember obviously very little from those weekly confirmation classes that I went to.
Right. Sure.
Um, and I don't remember having any like spiritual I don't remember any like true beliefs connected to it. It was really just like we went every Sunday because my friend went, and
Yeah.
um my mom would drop me off. She didn't go, and then but she would
Oh,
drop me off. Um but then at some point, and I don't really remember why, but she did start going there,
okay.
and we went there for a while, and a very traditional Lutheran church, where
Yeah.
you kneel to take communion. It was just such a degree off of Catholicism, really,
Yeah.
like from what I understand now. um
Catholic light.
yeah.
Catholic
And
light. Yeah.
so because of I went to a public school this whole time, and because of mean girls and bullying, I needed to get out of there. And so the only option was a Catholic school, a Catholic high school that was about 45 minutes from home. So the beginning of my freshman year, I began commuting to a Catholic school.
Okay.
And which was interesting because I think there was just as many Hindu and other religions, because there are several big hospital systems, and all of the doctors sent their children there.
Yeah.
So it was a Catholic school, and it was run by nuns, and there was a convent like 50 feet out the door.
Sure.
But um, it was I took religions of the world instead of um, their like they had their own confirmation type classes and stuff, the sacraments and stuff that the Catholic students would take, and then the rest of us would take religions of the world or something in place of it.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Um, so for 4 years though, I sat through mass every Friday.
Oh, wow.
So I had, a bird's eye view of that, right? And I couldn't participate, nor did I want to, but I had to sit there.
Yeah.
So, and I can remember back then just pondering things
Yeah.
during that. You know what I mean? Like just
Yeah. Sure.
trying to understand.
Yeah.
And I guess like even at that age, just kind of thinking like there must be something to this, but this is way over my head. I don't understand what it is, but people are really into this. So
Yeah.
it must be something, right?
Right. Right.
Um so my senior year, I was a foreign exchange student to France.
Oh, France. All right.
Yeah, to a little town called Albi in the like southern south of France.
Okay.
And so, and then that was an interesting year too, because at this point I really didn't have any type of faith or beliefs of, I mean, I'm sure I believed in God,
Yeah.
like, but it just wasn't a thing that was talked about. It just wasn't like, I never heard like from even at Catholic school, it wasn't like, oh, you're going to go to hell, or, you know, it just wasn't like that. Like, it just was like religion was kind of just like non-existent, or I was oblivious. I don't know. Could have been either one. Because when you're a teenager, you know, sometimes you can be oblivious to those things.
Oh, sure.
But when I was in France, I was fortunate enough to travel I went to be an exchange student with Rotary, the Rotary Club.
Yeah.
And so they had a lot of trips and stuff organized for us. And I traveled like all over Western Europe, going to like really old cathedrals and
Beautiful.
just things that now I wish I could go back and like experience
Sure.
again with a little bit of like a little more understanding.
Right.
But just the cathedrals that were shelters during the Crusades, and you know, things like that. Like I remembered, I was aware enough to remember those kind of things, but I certainly did not understand what the Crusades really were. You know, it's like in hindsight that I look back, and then even, you know, fast forward to when I began really studying church history.
Oh,
And yeah, like years later, right? Decades later. And I remember reading about the Albigensians and how they were persecuted and hunted and slaughtered. And lo and behold, Albigensian is from Albi, France, the little town of about 50,000 where
oh
I
my
lived
goodness.
for that year. And I had no idea, you know, no idea the history of where I was.
Wow.
And how that connected to church history. So that was interesting. So I kind of had such a mismatch of a little taste of everything, but I didn't own anything, you know,
Right.
just like I really didn't have beliefs.
Okay.
After my freshman year of college, I became pregnant with my oldest son, and I moved back home as a single mom to have him move back in with my parents.
Okay.
And when I took about a year off, and then I went back to college, and I was commuting. It was about I wasn't commuting back and forth every day, but I would come home for the weekends
Mhm.
and bring my son, you know, home with me, and then he would go to the daycare at the college. And it was about an hour and a half one-way commute. And it's like over the mountains and through the woods, you know, a really rural stretch of road. And there was a huge stretch where at that time there wasn't even radio stations that came in,
Oh
like
my
nothing.
goodness. That
Yeah,
is
like
rural.
nothing.
Yeah.
Yes. And I had my parents' old minivan that I drove around, and I remember saying something to my mom about like, "Don't you have anything I can listen to?" It actually
Right.
it was cassette tapes at the time,
Oh
um,
yeah. I remember those.
and yeah, so I asked my mom, you know, you must have something I could listen to. Well, she had the entire series of the Left Behind.
Oh
Yeah.
no. Okay.
So I ended up listening to the Left Behind series, you know, going back and forth.
I did too,
And
Brandee, just so you
did you?
know. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not laughing because it's ridiculous. I yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I remember, so this is the first time I remember there being like any personal conviction or emotion
Right.
behind like a belief or like a, you know, a religious belief.
Right.
And so when it got to the point of like the rapture and they were left behind, I remember just being angry as could be. I mean, angry because nobody, like I had been, you know, I had been at the Lutheran church for years, and then I did the Catholic high school, and then
Right.
my mom at some point along there got really serious about Jesus and like
Oh,
really read her Bible and stuff, but I don't
okay.
remember. So we differ on this. Like I guess it's about perspective, right?
Right.
So when I went to my mom angry saying, like, what on earth? Why did you not tell me that there was going to
Right.
be this rapture? Like, seriously?
Right.
Like, you just didn't tell me? Like, I didn't
Right.
know about this,
Seems
you know, and I
important.
was, Yeah.
Seems
And I was
important.
really upset.
Yeah.
And then she was like, Brandee, like I sat on your bed and we talked about this, I have no recollection of it whatsoever. And she
Oh,
just insists that we have these conversations, and I insist we did not. And I
right.
believe her. I don't know why it
Sure.
didn't stick. I don't have any idea. Um, but, and I remember at that point being like, okay, I don't know, like, if any of this is true, but if it's true, I'm going to err on the side of caution, right? And I already believed it. I didn't have any reason to not believe Jesus was real or that any of it was true. I knew the basics of the gospel, but um but then it was like, okay, I better take this a little bit more seriously because there's going to be a rapture and I'm going to be left here, and like, who wants
Right.
that? Like,
Right.
nobody wants that, right? So that was kind of, I think I was maybe 22-ish, right? It was right around in there.
Okay.
Um, and so, a young single mom at the time, going to school, working. My family was super supportive. Like, I wasn't out on my own, where I had to fend for
Oh,
myself. Like,
right.
they were
That's
really,
helpful.
really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but one thing that did stick with me that whole time, like, obviously my parents weren't thrilled, that I was having a baby. And it wasn't so much like, oh, you're from a Christian standpoint of you're not married. And, it wasn't that. It was just like, I had spent the year in France. I was fluent in French. I was going to school for French for international trade. I had like a really set plan for my future. And, that's always a shakeup, when that changes like that. But there were other people, family members and others around us, that when they found out I was pregnant, I was 20,
Uh-huh.
that didn't know whether to say congratulations or I'm sorry. And you could
Oh,
see it on their faces.
sure.
It wasn't like I could feel it,
Yeah.
and that was hard, right? Like, because
Yeah.
I could see, like, some people were way more judgmental than others.
Oh, of course.
And some of those people were people that I knew well enough. When you're a kid, you overhear your parents talking with their friends, with aunts, with uncle,
Right.
you hear, right?
Sure.
So I knew some of the stuff in these people's closets,
Yeah.
and but it wasn't public.
No.
It wasn't as obvious as a growing belly.
Right.
So it was very much the pot calling the kettle black,
Yeah. Sure.
just because people didn't know what was in their closets. And I remember I felt angry about that, like, that they just didn't have any room to judge. And I, even at that time, like, it was like, this is a baby. Like, ideal circumstance, no, but it's a baby,
Right.
and God
Right.
wouldn't have allowed this baby to be conceived if he wasn't supposed to exist.
Mm,
I could see that even then, right?
right. Sure.
Um, so then, um, I I guess there was a while like there where it was shortly after the Left Behind part. Like, I had a cousin, she and her husband moved to Pennsylvania, right in my small town, and he began pastoring a local church.
Okay.
And so my son and I started going to the church, and it was phenomenal, actually. I mean, a very, very tight knit, like, small country church, but just really kind people, genuine,
Sure.
loving, kind people. And we were there, and I never felt judged by them. I really, like, it never even crossed my mind. Like, nobody judged me that I knew of, right? Like, I didn't feel it, and nobody
Right.
said anything. Um, and so we were still, I was still commuting and gone a lot of weekends, but the weekends that we were home, we would go to that church.
Okay.
And it was non-denominational, but it was very similar to Baptist, I would say. But loved the pastor, just a wonderful human being. And I still have just the utmost respect for him and, and his wife.
Yeah.
And, this is the same church where I met my husband, Keith, and, the pastor who married us. And it was just a wonderful place.
What a
Then,
blessing.
yeah. So I think one of the things especially like in deconstructing, is that people assume that you've been really hurt by the church,
Right.
that something happened and you're disgruntled and you're trying to take it out on God, and you're going to take it out on all the churches everywhere and everybody who goes to church. And
Yep.
I didn't have that experience.
Yeah.
When we were, I think it was it was the fourth, when I had my fourth baby. We were already, my husband and I were already feeling like there's something more. Like we kind of just felt like the church was dead.
Yeah.
And we had this like little fire kindled in us, but we had no idea like what was missing or what to look for, or
Right.
like we couldn't put it into words. We didn't know what it looked like. We didn't know where to find it. We just knew something was missing. Right. So
Right.
we weren't disgruntled. Nobody had hurt us. We weren't angry or anything,
Right.
but we were both in agreement that this could not possibly be it.
Right. Okay.
It just couldn't be. Right.
Yeah.
And it was like for almost a year that we went back and forth about leaving. But my husband's parents that's the church my husband had been in.
Right.
Since birth, and my cousin's husband was pastoring there, and and then we knew everybody really well. They were like family. And so when we had the fourth baby, I remember, I gave birth to my babies at home, and I was super healthy, and it was like he was born like on a Thursday night, and we were in church on Sunday morning, and hormonal and postpartum and all the stuff. I remember walking in, this is when we were in the midst of like, what do we do? Are we staying here or not? And I remember walking in that Sunday morning with my newborn baby and like scanning the church from behind and like taking this mental stock of there's not a single person in here I wouldn't hand my newborn to, and that they were truly like, we just trusted them. We loved them. We did life with them.
Yeah.
And so it was really emotional because it was like, okay, God, why are you calling us to leave? Like these are our people, we had little ones there's an 11-year gap between, the oldest, my son, and then when we moved on to have 5 others.
Sure.
And so when, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this too. Like, I remember as a woman, my husband was a deacon of this church. He also ran the sound system every Sunday. Did the slides and, the mics and all the stuff, right? The music and all those things. So on, Sunday mornings, I had the choice of either go to the basement and be in the nursery the whole time.
Right.
And forfeit that little bit of time with other like speaking, communicating adults, because I was home with little ones.
Right.
And I didn't want to go to the nursery, and my kids were not kids that I could leave in the nursery. They just wouldn't do it.
Right.
So my choice was to spend Sunday mornings with I didn't have help because his hands were busy, doing the sound system and everything. And I'm continuously feeding kids snacks, nursing a baby, trying to keep them quiet, picking up crayons. Meanwhile, I'm sweating and I'm overwhelmed and I'm on the verge of tears trying to keep kids. And, it wasn't other people like expecting that of me. It was my own expectations, but you don't want to be the one sitting in church that's disrupting everything, right?
No, of course not.
Excuse me. So I remember even back then thinking like God knew he was going to give me these babies. like
Oh,
something doesn't fit,
right.
something's not right here. Like, and I think any family that tries to make it to church on any type of regular basis would admit that Sunday mornings are miserable. I
Yeah.
mean, miserable, like
Yeah.
nobody can get dressed on their own. Nobody can brush their teeth. Nobody can, I
Right.
mean, it's
That's a
just
lot of
like,
work.
yeah, chaos
Yeah.
and yelling and crying and, just all the stuff that would
Like,
go into trying to get kids ready. And then, so you're already like sweating and fighting with each other and stuff by the time you get there. And then you spend the hour and a half to 3 hours, depending, to me, church became just the process of going to church became so overwhelming and exhausting and mentally and emotionally draining.
yeah.
But then it's an obligation,
Right.
like it was an obligation because we had to do the sound system, but it was
Right.
also, I also wanted to be with those people,
Yeah.
like I wanted to go hear what was being said and spend that time with those people.
I don't
But
blame you, Brandee. They
yeah,
sounded wonderful, and those kind of people are out there for
yeah,
sure. And that
yeah.
must have been difficult.
Yep. So that was kind of like because I didn't grow up in church. So that was
Right.
my first like stretch of consistent church going.
Right.
So I would say, I think we started attending there when my son was around two, maybe between 2 and 3. And then I married Keith when my son was 7. And then we stayed there another 7 or 8 years. So it was a long time. And then we were like, my husband understood the stress of, there was a church split and there was all kinds of weird things that went on. Um, and that was like really uncomfortable and high emotion. No, didn't have anything to do with us, but it
Right.
was just the stuff we witnessed. We were kind of gun shy a little bit.
Sure.
And so it was a really good time to say, okay, we'd heard of the concept of a home church at that point. So but we didn't know of a home church, and we certainly weren't in a position to like start one or anything.
Yeah.
So we just stopped going for a while,
Okay.
and for about 6 months. And it was really awkward. Like Sunday
Yeah.
mornings were just, we didn't have the stress of going to church, but we had the stress of like, this
Not
feels
going to church.
weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, we felt like this
Yeah.
guilt, like,
Yeah.
just it was really heavy. And then we ended up eventually finding a church that was pastored by somebody that my husband coached basketball with for years.
Mhm.
And so there was just one Sunday morning that we were like, yeah, I think we should try that. So we moved from basically Baptist, just a really conservative, non-charismatic church, then we
Well,
moved into an Assemblies of God church.
oh no. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but we felt like, okay, this is it, right? Because there was energy and there
Oh,
was
sure.
like, it wasn't like one of the really crazy kind, but it was more, just way more energy, a lot more
Yeah.
lively. People
Well, it's
just
in the
didn't
name.
seem,
It's in the
yeah,
name, right? Brandee charismatic, So
yeah,
there's an expectation that it won't be a quote unquote dead church, right?
right.
Yeah.
Well, and me not growing up in the church world, like I didn't know. I mean, I knew that there was like Presbyterian and
Right.
Baptist, and I knew denominations, but I had no idea what was within them, right? Like I didn't know that some were charismatic and some were, I just didn't know that stuff.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah.
um,
Understandable.
like and it was way out of my husband's comfort zone, but he was also like at the same place where we knew something was missing, prior to that, right?
Right.
So we were there for, I don't know, a year. And at the same time, there was a family who moved into our area
Mm.
that we became very close friends with. And we met them because we have rentals. My husband's a property investor,
Oh, cool.
and he showed them a rental, and they ended up renting from us, and that was how we met them.
All right.
And this guy had years of experience in like deliverance ministry and
Oh,
all
yeah.
kinds of stuff, like
Sure.
all kinds of stuff, right? And I mean, he is the kind of guy who fasted every single Monday and would just go in his basement in a closet and pray in tongues for like 24 hours straight,
Okay. Yeah, I
like on
get
a
it.
regular basis.
Sure.
Super disciplined, ate like pristine, um, and lifted weights. And I mean, he really had mastery over his flesh, right? Like, I mean, I
Right.
guess that's how I looked at it at the time. Like, I'm got all these little ones, and I just would grab whatever I could eat whenever I could. And,
Yeah.
and so I looked at someone like him, like I was envious that he could just be so
Put, to-
regimented.
put together. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't have that. So we did a lot of Bible studies and stuff with him. And then we ended up starting a home fellowship with them.
Oh.
And we continued. So we did that on Saturday nights, and then we continued going to that church on Sundays. And that went on for quite a while until some really weird stuff that I still can't explain
Oh.
started going on, and it scared the heck out of us.
Oh,
Like,
goodness.
it just really, really scared us. Um, and so then we really just didn't know what to do. And like in the hyper charismatic realm, let's just say that,
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff like, um, we didn't do this, but somebody else did this in our home. And, um, Keith was actually had all the kids down in the basement doing a little lesson with them, and I
Uh-huh.
was traveling,
Uh-huh.
and they were meeting at our house. And then like getting everybody to get in a line, and somebody blew on somebody at the end of the line, and everybody fell over, and things like
Oh,
that,
yeah.
right? Like,
Gotcha. Gotcha.
um and but then just all kinds of just weird things that we just like we couldn't understand, we couldn't explain. It was super uncomfortable, and things got weird. Like I said, we got really scared. And my mom and my sister also attended this, and they were there that night. And
Okay.
like they were a lot more conservative, and like panicked, honestly.
Okay.
And I got a call from my mom, and she was basically telling me what went on, and she was crying. I mean, she was hysterical.
Oh,
And because she was scared too. And
yeah.
long story short, though, it opened our eyes to like, whoa, something isn't right here. And I
Right.
still, to this day, if I'm honest, as much as I've learned, as much as I've think I understand things, I don't know how to explain like the things that happened.
Oh,
I don't know how to explain it to this day. But um we realized that if there was deception within that, which is what it seemed like, right?
right.
If there
Right.
was deception in it, it seemed logical to us that the only way to never be deceived again was to know the Bible so well for ourselves that
Sure.
it could never be twisted. It just couldn't be used in a way that was inappropriate or scary, or
Right.
whatever. And so after that experience, like in full PTSD, we
Hmm.
began just hardcore studying the Bible.
Brandee, let me
Mhm.
interrupt. Just so when you say we, I'm assuming you meant Keith and yourself both, right?
Yes, and my
Okay.
mom and my sister,
Oh, okay. Good.
especially, like the four of us. There was like, I don't know, a 4 or 5 month period where um, we we would get together sometimes 2 and 3 times a week and
Oh,
study. and and I can remember sitting there like with I couldn't even venture to guess how many times we said, like, I don't understand. Like,
Right.
what happened? What was that? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
none of us could comprehend. And um, so we just started studying. I didn't even know what a concordance was. I had
Okay.
no idea what a lexicon was. I didn't know any of those things.
Yeah.
I was the person who happily sat and listened to the pastor, um, give a sermon, and I would turn in the Bible to where the verses were. But
Right.
by the time I would get to the verses, he was already done with them because I
Yeah.
didn't know the Bible,
Right.
I did devotions and different things like that over the
Yeah.
years. But like I knew I knew the token verses, right? Like that
Sure.
most people know, the ones that are quoted.
John
But I didn't know
3:16.
what.
Oh, I just said, yeah,
Mhm.
John 3:16, for instance, and
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
often quoted.
Yep. And then, in my defense, kind of like I had 5 children under
Yeah.
8 years old and a teenager, and it was just overwhelming.
Yeah. Sure.
And that was always in the midst of that was that personal wrestling with my relationship with God, because again, it's like you're up all night with babies and nursing and toddlers and teething, and then you have this Christian culture, like
Yeah.
the Lisa Turkhurst culture, and all
Oh,
these.
Lisa Turkhurst. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
read books, and I would
Sure.
follow all those kind of things. And so I'm supposed to be getting up before it's light out to read my Bible, when I fell asleep at 2:30, and I'm soaked in
Oh,
breast milk, and I'm
yeah.
like I'm tired, and I'm missing, like, and
I get it.
so
I
it
get
was
it.
always that personal, like, God, what do you want from me? Like,
Yeah.
this isn't designed for a mom, like,
Right.
if these are the rules, like, I don't know how to follow. It's not because my heart wasn't willing. It was just
Right.
because, like, who can do that? Oh, and by the way, you're supposed to be the Proverbs 31 woman, and you're supposed to be this to your husband, and this to,
Yeah.
and it was exhausting and
Yeah.
inauthentic,
Mm.
and nobody can do it.
No.
Nobody can do it. And I just was one of those people that got to the point where I could voice that, just
Yeah.
say,
Sure.
like, are you kidding me? Like, who's doing this?
Right.
And on the other side of that, when, all those years of your husband's supposed to be the spiritual head of your household and the leader,
Right.
and, all these things. And my husband is a very intelligent person, but multiple intelligence. Like,
Yeah.
he's in touch with his emotions. He can verbalize them. He is not the stereotypical man that is clams up and can't get things out. Like, he's very verbal, and he can talk, and he can tell me what he needs. Um and he felt like he was epically failing
Right.
as the leading the being the spiritual leader. And then I'm going to bed angry because he didn't read the Bible with the kids, and I've been with them all
Oh my
day, and I'm
gosh.
exhausted. Um and yes, I'm capable of doing that, but
Yeah.
I'm tired, and you're the one who's supposed to do that. That's your role. And
Oh,
like, it was just nothing seemed to work, right? But
right.
then, built into this culture, is that belief that if it's easy, then you're not doing it right.
Right.
Because Satan is the one that's making it hard. Satan is the one making you not want to read your Bible. Satan's the
Yeah.
one that makes it so when you read that verse 6 times in a row and you don't know what it's saying,
Yep.
it's Satan that's clouding your mind and not allowing you to understand it. And
Yep.
it's like that. It's a fail safe,
Sure.
that's built in,
Sure.
so that you stay on that wheel of never feeling adequate, never feeling like you're doing enough, never feeling like you're doing the right things. And all the while, I had 6 souls that came through my body into this world that are going to go to hell if I don't get this right.
Yep. That's right.
And the weight of that is,
Unbelievable.
it's absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I mean, all of us, like Christian or not, you just love your children so deeply. I mean, you will do things for them that you would never do for yourself.
Right.
And then, but if I screw up and if my doctrine's wrong, or I don't do this right, or I don't, just any number of things, like they could end up in hell. And to wear that weight, like on our shoulders,
Yeah.
it's just like, that was incredible,
Yeah.
And besides, if I was going to hell, right? But if
Right.
my kids are, it's a different story.
I can only imagine. I don't have kids myself,
Mhm.
Brandee, but I have 3 nieces and a nephew and 2 godchildren.
Mhm.
And the thought of them spending a second in a fiery hell pit, yeah, it's extremely difficult to even think about that. Or any
Yeah.
unsaved friends, not even
Right.
children, but
Yeah.
my grandfather, who I don't think was quote unquote saved. I prayed for him every night for years and years and years until he died. And
Yes.
anyway, it's
Yes.
it's heavy. The weight of it, the guilt and shame on both sides. You mentioned, Keith being the pressure of being the leader of the household, and that's his job, and you have all these kids, and you have your own side, your own job that you're supposed to do, and it's untenable. I mean,
Mhm.
you just can't juggle all those balls successfully. The guilt and shame that is tucked into that. I felt that's what you were touching on a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's just no way to do it all.
Yeah.
You just can't. And I mean, obviously, you have to keep them alive and clean and fed, and like all the other things too, right? So in it, when it's, but that the weight of that it's just enormous.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, your grandfather, and I was blessed to have just the most. I mean, I can't, to this day, I can't say any negative thing about my grandfather.
Right. Me neither.
And just the most beautiful human being. He was not a man of many words, but I remember his smile like it
Right.
was
Oh
yesterday.
my goodness, that's beautiful.
And he died when I was 18, I think it was. And they never did go to church or anything. My mom
Right.
and my aunt, they talked to him about Jesus, and he told them that he believed. Yeah, he was a very moral man, a very kind man, ethical, honest. He embodied all of those things. But it haunted me
Yeah.
absolutely, and my mom, even my mom too. Like, because I remember asking, "Are you sure he was saved? Are you
Yep.
sure he was saved?"
Yep.
And we didn't know. We couldn't know for sure. But the thought of him burning in hell was
Yeah.
absolutely more than I could handle,
Yeah.
as a Christian. It was just more than. And then, as I've gone through the deconstruction process, unfortunately, I've been at lots of funerals.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, my father is a mortician. He's been a mortician for almost 50 years. He owns 3 funeral homes, and he's our county coroner.
Oh
So I've been
wow.
around death a lot. Okay.
Sure. Sure.
And um, we grew up sharing the driveway with the funeral home. It's my house, and then one of my dad's funeral homes, and the driveway goes between the 2 houses. So,
Oh,
I grew up in a situation where it's like you ran out of toilet paper, you ran over to get it at the funeral home,
okay.
out of the stash over there,
Oh
things
my
like that,
goodness.
right?
Very
Um,
interesting.
yeah. And then I when I first moved back home after when I think my son was around 2, we moved back to my hometown, and my son and I moved into the apartment above the funeral home right next door to my parents. So, um, it's a big old Victorian house, and
Okay.
the stairway is open, like it was never converted. So the stairway is open, like from the downstairs to the upstairs, just like it's one original house.
Yeah.
And so during funeral services and viewings, calling hours, wakes, whatever people call them, um, we could hear everything.
Yeah.
We were up there watching TV or whatever in the other room, but if I would walk across to go to my kitchen, like
Yeah.
would hear what's going on downstairs.
Sure.
So I've had more than enough opportunity just to ponder death and like
Yeah.
what happens and I just always had so many questions. And then as I was like in that hardcore Christian worldview, none of the questions about death were answered. It just I didn't have answers,
Right.
and um that was always really challenging because I spent so much time around death,
Yeah.
and my dad, there were plenty of times where I would have to go down and help work at calling hours, like open the door, greet people,
Yeah.
different things.
Sure.
And so I got to see a very broad range of ways that people deal with grief and death, and
Right.
and I've heard hundreds of funeral messages from pastors,
Sure.
clergy, whatever.
Yeah.
And you sit there, and I'm the kind of person that has this dialogue in my head that's like saying, well, you don't know where they really are.
Oh,
Like you can't know that. I have
no.
this the whole thing in my head that
Sure.
that's going on, and so many things just didn't make sense.
Right.
In addition to that I think is like significant just to my personal journey is when I was young, um I was always into like paranormal stuff. Like
Yeah.
there were tons of TV shows on, like ghost hunter type
Yeah.
things or like things
Sure.
like that. I did not like horror movies or gory things. It wasn't like that. It was
Okay.
like mediums and
Yeah.
hauntings and but really with like trying to understand.
Yeah.
And when I was in 6th grade, I remember you remember how the Scholastic book fair used to come to the schools?
Oh, yeah.
And I had money for the book fair, and I bought the book Communion, which was like the true story of alien abduction.
Yeah.
And in 6th grade, I read that
Oh,
like more
wow.
than once. And I look back and I'm like, why was that at the 6th grade book fair? Like, I mean, it's a terrifying book still to this
Right.
day.
Yeah.
And it had an alien like a gray alien right on the cover.
Sure.
And I remember even then I was scared of the cover, but I had to read it,
Yeah.
because I like was interested. And my mom also watched the paranormal stuff. But the same thing. It was trying to understand, where does this fit in?
Yeah.
Like, we have no reason to not believe these people, that these
Right.
things are happening. Like, they lose everything if they're discredited,
Yep.
um so I had years of that, and I had multiple experiences. We lived in a huge old Victorian home,
Right.
and every one of my siblings, we have all had experiences in
Yeah.
that home. We've seen things, right? And when you've experienced that, no amount of belief system can negate that you experience that, right? So
No.
down the
No.
road, when I became this hardcore Christian and my worldview got narrowed inside this one particular box,
Yeah.
in the back of my mind, I still had these things that I was like, this doesn't fit. Where does this
Right.
fit? Where does this fit?
Right.
Like, even though I wasn't like actively thinking that, I still knew it was incongruent. Like, it had to fit somewhere. I
Yeah.
experienced this myself, and it needs to fit, but there's no explanation for this. And I
Sure.
used to get really frustrated because I ended up with really bad health issues. By the time
Oh,
I was
no.
28, I was like fat and sick and hormonal issues and
Oh,
allergic to everything under the sun. And I mean, I was in a really, really rough place physically.
okay.
And I was, and my son was vaccine injured and on the autism spectrum.
Oh,
And
no.
had lots of issues, lots and lots of issues.
Mm.
And I started to learn about natural health and natural remedies and how food affects our bodies and,
Yeah.
all kinds of things like that. And
You
I
said
remember
28. You were
when
28.
yes, it was
Okay.
20, I was 28 when Keith and I got married in September.
Uh-huh.
And it was in December, just a few months later, that I read the first book that kind of catapulted me into like, oh my goodness, everything I've been taught about nutrition is a lie. Everything I've been taught about
Right?
drugs and, big pharma and, all of it. Like,
That's a whole nother show, Brandee.
yeah, it is. It is. But I remember, being like, why doesn't the Bible just tell us what we're supposed to eat?
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
how are we supposed to take care of our bodies? Like,
Yeah.
I was angry that what my son had been through because I didn't know any better and I poisoned him. I allowed him to be poisoned,
Yeah.
and I watched him struggle and, with eczema and, like sensory, like, he only ate like 8 tan colored foods, and,
Oh wow.
um, and every time we had to try to put soccer cleats and shin guards and, we were both crying because the
Oh
sensory, if you have a string between your toes, it's the end of the world. And,
yeah.
there was like all this stuff from those injuries and from being poisoned.
Oh no.
And I was angry because,
Yeah.
like, why would God allow Satan to do this? Like, this is an innocent child. Like,
Mhm.
why is he allowed, why? So I always questioned those
Yeah.
things.
Sure.
And even more so as I began to study nutrition and different things. And just like, um, so these were all like little touchstones along the way, things that like
Right.
just made no sense. So that when I really got to the place where I started to really seriously question,
Yeah.
there's a million of them. Like, it would take us hours to sit
Yeah.
here but just to get an idea of like,
Sure.
these were all floating around in my mind, things that I couldn't reconcile with my worldview,
Yeah.
you know. Um, and then I remember it very well. We built a house right near my husband's parents on land, like out in the country, like our dream. Get out of town, get in the country, have a garden. And we built a house. And I remember it was right when we moved in, so that was about 14 years ago.
Okay.
And I have no idea what I was listening to or whatever. I think YouTube must have been pretty new. I don't know when YouTube came out. I don't know when that was, but it was new to me, right? Like, I guess. Um,
I want to
but
say 2002 or somewhere in there. I don't know. I'll look it up.
yeah, I don't know, but it wasn't something that I did. Like, I just didn't listen to videos or whatever. I just know that was a thing. And but I remember listening to something, and you know what I think it was? It was a Chip Ingram video, I think is what I was listening
I
to.
remember. I liked Chip
Was
Ingram.
he Living on the Edge, or was that him?
Yep.
No, that was the other. Was it?
Living. I'm trying to remember this theme song.
Yeah.
I
I
don't
can't
know.
remember, but he was one of my favorites. I always listened to him, and so I was listening to something along those lines, right? Very mainstream Christian, because that's how I studied, because I didn't have time to read, and I was always cooking in the kitchen and kids under feet. And so I was listening to a Bible study online, and then when the videos pop up on the side of the screen, you may also like or whatever.
Right.
And I saw something about redheaded, elongated skulls, giant redheaded, like elongated skulls with double rows of teeth. And I'm like, well, I have to click on that. It's like
Yeah.
one of those like clickbait ones. And I was always fascinated with giants and like miniature things
Sure.
ever since I was little. I always read Guinness Book of World Records and everything. And I was just always fascinated by things like that. And so I listened to this video and it rocked my world because it was about the Nephilim.
Yeah.
And I'd literally never heard of that. So at this point, I've been in church for a decade, every Sunday. And then here's this person on here quoting from Genesis. and other parts of the Old Testament talking about the Nephilim. And I was like, what? Like, wait a minute here, like,
Nephilim.
yeah, that was not a thing I'd ever heard of. And I'm like, oh my goodness, it's right here in the Bible, So I went down that rabbit trail. And, just all the evidence of the giant bones that they've hidden, and, the
Right?
Smithsonian has thrown in the ocean, and all the stuff, right? Like, I
Yeah.
watched everything, and I was
Yep.
like
Yep.
so enthralled with that.
Sure.
And then again, it was like that still fit. I mean, this presented it from a biblical view, from a biblical standpoint. So it wasn't like it didn't contradict the Bible. They were
No.
quoting the Bible.
Yeah, it was right in there.
But but it was very much like, how could I have not known that this even existed? And like, so that spurred on, and then everybody just thought I was crazy. And then I started looking at giant ancient tree stumps, and the big, like how it talks in the book of I think it's in Enoch too, where the giants cut down the trees, and I'm like telling my siblings and my mom, and not like strangers or anything, but just like people close to me, and they're like, just, are you off your rocker?
That's how people react, as you know.
Yeah. But it's like, look, I'm showing you evidence. Like, I'm just, look at this, but I've always been very curious, and just very like, I marvel at people who are bored, right? Because I have not been bored ever. Do you know what? Like, there's always something that I want to, besides my responsibilities, but just the things I want to pursue. And I love learning about these things, right?
Sure.
And so just like this whole world began to open up of things that like I just didn't know existed, right? But all the while, I'm still cramming these into my biblical worldview. Like, make it make sense somehow in here, because the Bible is the pure, God-breathed, unadulterated word of God.
Right.
So it can't contradict, and I was doing a great job making it fit, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like, I did a really good job at that.
Yeah, sure. Well, a lot of us do.
Yeah.
Do. Yeah.
And of course, I read lots of books, and those books were all from that point of view. And so they, my confirmation bias was really strong, and it all fit. And, it just one thing led to another. And, but it was very interesting because we began using the concordance, like we looked up every word. So my sister is a word and number and pattern person. She's very gifted in seeing those kind of things.
Yeah, sure.
And I didn't even know what etymology was, like, why do I need to do that? I don't need to know that. So we had this like little study group kind of thing going on. And, she was amazing at that. And I wasn't, so I let her do that, and she would bring this stuff to the table, and we were like, wow, and she's looking up the words. And I remember very specifically, like, the word for womb throughout most of the Old Testament is matrix, and
isn't that something?
Yeah, just like, so like a lot of the stuff that we learned hardcore studying the Bible, came in handy down the road. But it was, I still have all of my reference books, lexicons. I have the King James 1611 in Old English.
Oh, there you go.
I have the interlinear Greek Hebrew side by side. I have the Matthew's Bible. I have a Geneva Bible. Of course, just the regular, all kinds of versions. I have a Bible for moms and just like, I couldn't even begin to tell you how many Bibles we had.
Sure.
I also have a Sefer, and those were popular there for a while. With like, we never went into the Hebrew roots thing, but we were on the periphery of it, and we saw people going head on into it.
Yeah, me too. Jen and I too. We have we've done broadcasts with people, in fact, that have gone that route, and not just a little bit, but big time, all the way.
Yeah,
like wearing the clothes, like wearing Old Testament-y clothes.
Don't mix your linen and wool.
Yeah.
Like, don't you? But well, I was in a few different Facebook groups where they took a like sharp right turn and went into Hebrew roots. And when people started circumcising their own babies and
Oh
stuff
my
like, I
God.
mean, I can't even now. I'm still traumatized. I don't know how to process some of those things that I saw. I
Yeah.
didn't see them circumcised, but they were doing it, right?
No, I get it.
And so we we saw that, and then we're just bouncing off the crazy weird what we began calling NAR, or New Apostolic Reformation,
Yes.
the charismania,
Yeah.
stuff. So for a long time, if you were to scroll way back on my Facebook, I was exposing charismania. I was like calling out
NAR.
all of these different,
Yeah.
NAR things, and then like once I got a real handle on that, like that's when the Hebrew root stuff came up. So I, like, we had extended family who are Jehovah's Witnesses.
Sure.
And so my sister especially did a lot of studying on that because it really affected her and her family.
Yeah.
And so I didn't hesitate to call out all of those cults, right? Meanwhile, I had no idea I was in one too.
Right. Yeah.
Mine just didn't have a name,
Yeah.
and but I got really good at seeing the hallmarks of a cult,
I'll
as I
bet.
looked at those and as I exposed those. I looked at the origins of them, and it was
Yeah.
like, if you can trace this back to one guy who lived, after the 1900s or whatever,
Yeah.
like, okay, this is pretty new. This,
Yeah.
this is a cult, right?
Right.
But then for whatever reason, I think partially because of going to a Catholic school and having so many Catholic friends, like on my Facebook and stuff, I started really studying church history. And part of it was like when we wanted to start a home fellowship, because we saw the problems within churchianity, that we called churchianity, like
Yeah.
the institutional church.
Sure.
And we knew tithing. We studied. We saw very plainly that in the Bible that tithing was a twisted Old Testament
Yep.
thing, and
Yep.
that we didn't want any of our money going to a mortgage and the coffee bar and the pastor's insurance that was covering abortion or morning after, like
Yeah. Right.
just all the stuff. Like we
Uh-huh.
could see the absurdity of the system.
Sure.
And but we weren't stupid. We could also see that it was, that had developed, that wasn't the origin of
Yeah.
Christianity. That's just the game of telephone 2000 years later. This is where we're at.
Oh. Yeah.
So studying the Bible, we just read over and over and over and over again, like, what would it have looked like if Jesus and the apostles, or after Jesus's death, the believers, what would it have looked like with them doing church, or the, meeting together, gathering, the
Right.
ecclesia, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so for 5 years, we hosted a home fellowship in our
Mm.
home.
Okay.
And we didn't have a pastor, we didn't have a leader. Women could speak just as well as men could. It was just families getting together,
Yeah.
reading, studying the Bible, doing life together, sharing a meal, laughing and crying together, and just true fellowship.
Yeah.
Very few disagreements, really, like on doctrinal issues and stuff, because we were all former churchgoers, all somewhere in that process
Right.
of like realizing, hey, maybe my denomination didn't have everything right. So
Yeah.
everyone was pretty open to, like, let's read the actual Bible and see where we
Oh my
fall.
goodness, that sounds wonderful. I would have loved to run into
Yeah,
something like that, Randy.
it was. But
That would have
but
been great.
locally, like in my community, because I think maybe families kind of came and went. There were a couple like core families that were with us like the whole time. But in a small rural community, when someone leaves the church that they've gone to their entire lives and takes their little family with them, it's very alarming. And so it would get back to me on a regular basis that I ran a cult, and that my husband was in my cult.
Yeah, right.
He doesn't post anything on Facebook. He doesn't say anything. So I look like the ringleader, right? Like
Sure.
I'm the one leading everybody astray, which just was not true. Like, and it used to make me upset. And then I would say like, okay, so what kind of power would I have to pluck somebody out of Jesus's hand? Because
Right.
that's literally what people were saying, like, because they left the church and went to do this like organic meeting where we all sat with the Bible open, and, our kids sat and played and did puzzles on the floor, or, just played, and we truly enjoyed each other's company. And, we were butchering chickens at this person's house on this weekend, and we were helping cut
Oh,
wood at that person's house. And, like this one needs this repaired. I mean, truly doing community the way that the way that it looked like they would have done in New
early church.
Testament times, right?
Yeah, early church.
Yeah. And it totally worked for us. And it was just interesting because we heard all kinds of rumors, but not one person would just say, "Hey, what do you guys believe? Like, what are
Yeah.
you studying?" Like, we would
Ask
have invited them, right?
ask the question. Yeah, ask the
Yeah.
question. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's still very much that way, but we were very open about, like, it wasn't some like secret thing where you needed a special handshake to come, just
Right.
it wasn't open to just anybody, because we saw like the fighting and the different belief. I mean, we had been in churches, like we saw that. So we just took the approach that like anybody who is supposed to find us will find us.
Yeah.
And it was usually just like a friend of a friend said, "Hey, I know someone doing a home fellowship and you guys are looking for one." It was just kind of
Right.
very organic, very,
Yeah.
very natural. We never had to turn anybody away. We never had to kick anybody out, like
Oh, sure.
nothing like that. Because it was just genuine people with questions trying to just be authentic Christians, right?
Yeah. Wonderful.
So yeah, that was really really nice. And then, so even all of us, like pretty much everybody was like digging in with their concordance and looking up words and just
Yeah.
like hardcore digging, right? This
Yeah.
was not like read a devotional,
Uh-huh.
and move on. It wasn't like that.
Of course.
It was, besides singing some songs and fellowship and stuff, it was really like Bible study
Yeah.
and deep things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the concept of Yahweh
There we
was something that when we first went through that scary situation with the NAR stuff,
Yeah.
that my sister got kind of, I just want to say, like, because she was so good with words and looking things up and piecing things together, she had looked it up. She had actually looked up Jehovah because of family members being Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right.
And now I haven't looked at this in a long time, so don't quote me, but when
No.
she looked up the root of the word Jehovah, when you look it up in a concordance, and by the way, concordances, it has to be a concordance before a certain date because they changed them. But we have the ones before that date. I had to hunt and I found them. I tracked them down so that we knew we were getting, more authentic, before the changes, even in the concordances. But when she broke down that word Jehovah, it essentially was like God of destruction and wrath,
Right.
kind
Right.
of thing, right?
Sure.
And so, but then, it was very obvious that like Yahweh was kind of the same thing. They just used different vowels, because there's no vowels in the Hebrew, and so for months and months and months, we dove like really deep into this and trying to figure out like, okay, so if Yahweh is not the Father that Jesus was speaking about, and it didn't seem like he was, then where did this term come from, and like who put it in the Bible, and when did this get edited in? How did it get there? Like somebody did this, and for months and months I dug trying to make sense of that. And I will say, like, I had a knowing, whether you call it the Holy Spirit or intuition or whatever, something didn't sit well with me about that.
Yeah.
Something was off, and I knew that. I just didn't have any evidence to prove it, and so that's what I was looking for. And then, there was a day when, I was sitting in my, in the den. It was like a Saturday morning, and I made a cup of coffee and I was studying my Bible. And so this, you got to remember too, that like, this was one of those ideals that I was trying to achieve, right? Like, I had kids running all over, yelling, like, and it's always like, can we paint? Can we, do something messy, whatever. But I'm trying to be this like idyllic Christian, right?
Well, sure.
And so I make the cup of coffee and I go in and I sit down, and I remember very clearly I was studying the manna in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And so I read the account in Exodus and I read the account in Numbers back to back.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, when I now I can't remember which one it was. I think it was in Numbers. Like, when you're reading it, you read the account about the manna, and then all of a sudden you're in another story, but you didn't even realize you got past the manna, right? You just keep reading. And it was the story about the man who they stoned to death for picking up sticks on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, I read that, and I felt like a full body flush of heat.
Yeah.
And I felt nauseous. Like I had a full body physical reaction when I read it, which was it was really strange, honestly. And I sat there for a minute feeling what was happening in my body, and I was by myself. I was alone in the room, and I said, that's not my God. Like, that's like, but I was like really disturbed, and I didn't know what to do with it. And my husband was working out in the garage, and I actually went out and I told him what happened, and he was distracted and busy, and he was listening to me, but he didn't get to experience what I experienced. Right.
Sure.
So he didn't fully grasp it, but I was like, this is something, right?
Yeah,
I had never had that happen before, and I had a full physical reaction.
I get it.
Yeah. So I had no idea what to do with it. No clue. I didn't know what to do with that. Then, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, I was up in my garden, and that was like time I used to pray. And, I'm pulling weeds and half cursing these weeds that go to China and are ruining my garden. And half of me is like praying, and, I don't remember exactly, like, I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, yes. And I went right down to the house, dirty hands, dirt under my fingernails, and started typing in and searching, because it was like this, almost like a download of the whole Yahweh thing.
Yeah.
And because I had been looking specifically, because of my confirmation bias, because of my worldview, I just knew that someone inserted that in the Bible.
Yeah.
So what I had been looking for prior to that was who did it and when, right?
Yep.
But the little download that I got was like, you're barking up the wrong tree. And I honestly can't remember right now what it was that, like, I was searching, but that was when everything changed.
Wow.
And it just was like, and I just knew that something overall wasn't right, you know.
Yeah.
I had already reached the point where, um we had gone, because we had been in a more conservative church, then we had gone to a more charismatic, then we had home church, and we didn't have a doctrinal statement or anything like that, right? We were
Right.
just studying
Sure.
and trying to figure things out. But I can tell you that my husband and I both, we had studied so much, and my mom and my sister, like, and other people within our group, that any topic, any major doctrinal topic, the kind that caused church splits and new denominations to be formed, I could have debated both sides of these topics using scripture and convince anybody. So, like, once saved, always saved versus like losing your eternal security, right? Like things like
Right.
that. Post, pre, mid, or post trib rapture.
Right.
I could have argued there is no rapture. Here's proof of the rapture. I could have argued anything that you could throw at me. Like, I could have debated and done it well and used the scripture to back it up. So then you just get to a point where you're like, which one is it? How can we possibly know?
Right.
Right? And then with social media, I mean, we already know that there's, like, I ended up looking it up at one point, and on Wikipedia, there are over 40,000 denominations listed with a name
Yep.
that are listed, right?
That's
Well,
right.
we live in Amish country and Mennonite country. So I can tell you for sure that there are hundreds of sects within Amish and Mennonite just
Yeah.
around us. And I know because the head covering is different, the width of their the way that they have to sew their dresses, the
Right.
shoulder width, like they have to measure that.
Yeah.
The length of their inseam, I know all these things because I know the people.
Right.
So there's hundreds, if not thousands, of other sects, cults, groups, individuals. Everyone's using the same book, the same source text, right? Everyone's
Yeah.
using some version of the Bible, and nobody agrees.
No.
And so then you get back to, well, the Holy Spirit will lead you into all truth.
That's a promise.
But whose truth? If
Right.
all of those people, like, and so, I mean, I think we could conservatively say 100,000 different, like, organized denominations or groups,
Yeah.
right? But they have completely opposite belief. I mean, it's a broad range, and some of them are just completely the opposite, polar opposite of each other. And
Seriously.
so it just got to the point where it was like, why, how am I that arrogant to think the Holy Spirit, I've got it right. Yeah, it's me.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's only
me,
me,
Brandee. It's not
right?
you. It's me.
Yeah. And so it just got to be like, it was, I mean, I want to say laughable, but it wasn't laughable, because at the time, if your doctrine is what decides whether or not you go to hell,
Yeah.
and you can argue both sides of the doctrine
Yeah.
equally, what do you do?
That's a good question.
Like, how do you reconcile that, right? It's by faith through grace.
Mm-hmm.
By grace through faith, excuse me. And
Yeah.
but then at the same time, if you can lose your salvation, like, you don't know from minute to minute, right?
Yep.
I also really struggled with, like, I was bold about sharing the gospel. And I remember my grandmother on my father's side, I was very close with her, and she actually had never stepped foot in a church until one of her grandchildren got married. So she was not raised in any type of religious environment at all. She knew nothing of
Right.
it.
Right.
And later she was honest with me that, like, her only, like, impression of Christians and Christianity was judgment and bigotry.
Yeah.
Like that's what she saw as a non-believer on the outside. That's what
Mhm.
she saw.
Yeah.
But because she was such a wonderful, loving person, she allowed me to get on my soapbox, and
Oh,
and share those things with her.
sure.
Um, but it was, yeah, I don't know. That's a whole other story. But when I was trying to share the simple gospel that a child can understand,
Yeah.
I realized that it also required this doctrine and that doctrine and this doctrine and this doctrine.
Yeah.
And oh, wait, we have to add this and we have to add this and we have to add this and we have to add this, right? Because there was nothing simple
No. It's a big
about
pile.
the religion that I was believing. There was nothing simple about it.
Yep.
Nothing. And I remember it just like almost going in circles. I was confusing her, right? Because like I knew it wasn't as simple as you are saved by grace through faith. Jesus
Yeah.
died, believe in him, right?
Yep.
How do you quantify faith?
Right.
How do you qualify faith?
Mm.
How do you know for sure from minute to minute if you
Yeah.
espouse, that you can lose your salvation?
Exactly.
How do you know which one it is this minute,
Yeah.
right? All of those things. And there are verses, as you know, that you can support both sides of that argument.
And they do.
Absolutely.
They do.
Right.
And they go back and forth, back and forth. Hey, Brandee, I
Mhm.
sent you a message in Messenger. I didn't want to ask you this on the air necessarily, but what I
Mhm.
would like, there's a lot here. I don't want to just stop, but I didn't
Mhm.
talk to you about this. Would you be at all willing to come back and do a part 2 next Friday? Are you in a place that
Mhm.
you set that time aside? Because I feel like there's so much more of your story left, and you have
Yeah.
not made me work at all. You have been a wonderful, wonderful guest, but I know that you're super, super busy. Would you be willing to do that? We could
Sure.
stop at
Yeah.
an hour and 30 minutes, and then we could continue part 2 next week, because I feel like you're at a really good point. You've laid some really great groundwork of how you got up to this point that you're talking about now, and the whole Yahweh thing for me. I mean, I'm understanding of that, and Jen is, and we've even talked about that. I did like a 5-part series when I discovered that. I think it was
Oh,
probably
wow. Yeah.
after you did.
Mhm.
I think it's a great stopping point if in fact you're willing to come back for a part 2 next Friday.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
I didn't want to put you on the spot like that. I didn't know if you'd see my message or not. I tried
No,
to
I
slow
didn't see it, but yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
Okay.
because it's really hard to sum up. Really, what
No,
we're
I know.
talking about is a lifetime of little things that all come together, that converge into, whoa, wait a minute, my whole paradigm just shifted,
No,
right? So,
I know, and
mhm.
I wanna give it the time, and if we continue tonight, it's gonna really
Yeah,
go on, and that's fine for me, but, we'd like to try to keep it as close to an hour and a half, and I know I said that, if it goes longer, it goes longer, but I really feel like I don't wanna take your, momentum away, but I don't feel like that's an issue with you.
no,
I don't
no,
see that as a problem. Is that okay?
no. Yeah, that's fine. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
I think it's a great stopping point. Brandee, I just so much appreciate you being willing to be transparent and to share your story with us. And then what I would like to do, well, I'll talk to you about that off air. But yeah, so we'll stop here. It is right at 8:30. So we started right after 7 o'clock, a couple minutes after 7. And we will continue this part 2 with Brandee's story next Friday night at 7 p.m. And if you're listening to the playback, thank you for giving us your time. And it's a wonderful story, and it's not all finished yet. So she's being graceful enough to come back and finish the story. Thank you, Brandee, for being here. Also, Jen is here, but she hasn't said much, which was kind of the plan. She'll be back here next week, and we'll see what others want to do as well. But we'll end it here. Thank you for everyone that listened, everyone that came tonight, and everyone that listens to the playback. This is, again, attempt to try a switch in format, and we hope that you enjoyed it. So for now, thank you, and everyone have a good weekend, and we'll see you next Friday on True Story Live. Good night.